Why, hello there, lovely virtual attendees of INVICTUSCON 2023. My name is Nathan Lurz. I am the GM and community manager over at Reckless Attack. But more pertinently, I have been a professional writer, journalist, and interviewer for more than a decade, including on our TTRPG interview show, Reckless Attack. But most pertinently, I am the moderator today of this very excellent game designer panel filled with very excellent game designers, all of whom I will now invite to please go around and introduce themselves to our lovely audience here today.
Hello, I am Sasha Sienna. My pronouns are she, he, and they, and I am a TTRPG designer and writer, luckily, since I'm here. So I am most known for my work with Jonny, with MacGuffin and Company. So because I get to introduce myself first, I get to talk about MacGuffin and Company. We make smart games for cool weirdos. We love to focus on unique worlds and the occasional fun. Do you know what? I'm absolutely whiffing this. I didn't think ahead of time to come up with a fun pitch. It's good. They're good games. They're funny. They're well written. They're smart. You'll like them.
Hell yeah.
I'm Sasha.
You go loud for the promo, and that fixes all problems always. Nailed it.
Hi, I'm Sam Leigh. My pronouns are she, they. I publish games under my game design business, Blinking Birch Games, but I'm best known for Anamnesis, which is a single-player game that uses tarot to tell the story of somebody who is discovering themselves. So I also am at Goblin Mixtape pretty much everywhere, and including on TikTok and YouTube, where I post videos about different indie TTRPGs.
Hi, my name is Timm Woods. I'm a professional game master and writer, and I'm a game designer, having worked on the Green Knight Quest for Honor RPG. Great to be here.
Hi, I'm Jonny. He, him. I am the other half of MacGuffin and Company, as well as a writer and author and VA. And Sash forgot to mention that we won our first collection of micro settings, Odd Jobs, won the UK Games Expo Judges Award for Best Adventure. So I thought I should drop that there, just to brag.
Bragging is very, very welcome here. That's half the point, I would say, of being here. And also, maybe we should all have another member of our various, game design partnerships or podcasts or whatever to be here to remind us of other things we forgot to promote, just like the two of you. But I'm sure we'll get through it all together. So very excited to talk to you guys all here today about, kind of some insights around your process, around your kind of goals and visions when you sit down to design games, and also just kind of what game design does for you guys and why you throw yourself at the arduous task of designing games sometimes. So I will kind of start with the super baseline question of what got you into designing games? Specifically, kind of, were you playing games at the time? What were you playing? And what kind of started tugging at you in terms of, I don't want to just play things. I don't want to just design things or run things. I want to really get in and write and create something for myself and to my own tastes. And we'll start with Sam.
Sure thing. So I had been playing games for a few years, and I think what really eventually pulled me into game design was that I had just learned about more of the indie scene of games, because I had no idea how unique of different games there were out there. And I remember I was scrolling on Kickstarter and looking through their games page and was like, what are all of these things? Had no idea. And then I kind of, from there, I started to get involved more in the community of the indie TTRPG space, saw what all these designers were doing and was like, this seems like so much fun. I want to try designing my own stuff. I want to try being part of this community. And it was also a really good mix of a lot of my interests and hobbies. I enjoyed writing, I enjoy theater, and there's also a part of game design that's like that figuring out a bit, that kind of logic puzzle of trying to fit mechanics into the story that you're making. And I just really love all of that. So it ended up being a really great mixture of a lot of things that I love.
Tim, we'll go Tim.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with what Sam was saying in terms of, I think that there's something inherently playful about game design, that it's like a logic puzzle. And I think especially people in the TTRPG community, just playing these games becomes in and of itself a little bit of game design. I do a lot of work with kids, and it's just so natural watching them go from playing RPGs to designing RPGs, that I was definitely interested in designing RPGs for as long as I can remember being involved in RPGs. I was excited about the idea of, oh, I want to make my own RPG. And I was just always, as many people I'm sure are, very intimidated by the prospect of, you get like a month or two into a project and it's just like, oh man, the momentum is. And so I was always trying to work on different projects. I didn't really start working on a project until literally the company A24 was reaching out to me saying, we want to design a game and we have 2.5 months to do it. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gonna need to change every part of how I go about this process.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to take on this challenge. And it is really the only RPG project I have, properly speaking, finished and brought to its culmination. So it was very satisfying working with the company. I don't think I would be standing here with a finished product of any kind if not for the deadlines that were imposed upon me.
External pressure.
There.
It really does a lot of work, at least in my life. So very understandable. Sasha?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Sam and Tim, I had played a lot and GM'd a lot, and I feel like because of the nature of TTRPGs, people who are into RPGs tend to be already very creative, and they tend to be already very, very engaged. It's a collaborative medium, not just between the people around the table, but between the creator and the table. So I feel like, to me, being somebody who is kind of creative and kind of dramatic and also a writer, going from playing the games to GMing the games to writing my own scenarios to just designing the games myself felt so natural. It kind of didn't feel like a conscious decision, just felt like something that, of course, that's what we're going to do next, right? Yeah, I feel like because of the nature of TTRPGs, everybody is actively creating the game as they play it in a way that makes that cross from kind of consumer to creator probably more malleable than in any other medium.
Jonny?
Yeah, so I mean, my dad's played tabletop RPGs, so like I've been kind of doing it since I was like 8 or so, like Old School Traveler or Warhammer First Edition, all that sort of stuff. So like as long as I can remember, I've been playing RPGs and thinking about those systems and creating my own stuff for it. And like Sash and everyone said, like the nature of role-playing games means that there is functionally no line between consumer and creator. Like if you are playing an RPG, even if you are playing even if you are playing a pre-written character in a pre-generated campaign, you are still creating the game anew. You are still like creating your own games, and you will gradually, like the bits of the system that you don't play, because nobody plays 100% of any system, you are naturally creating your own game by just instinctively dropping different bits of different systems. And so like it's very much that sort of evolution of like, I think anyone who plays RPGs long enough ends up either deliberately or accidentally doing some games design. And often it's just a matter of like, well, when do you put the trigger, write some stuff up and post it for other people to look at? When do you make the decision of like, hey, I think this is good enough that we should ask people to pay for it, you know? And so like a lot of it is just kind of choosing an arbitrary point at which to say, now I'm a games designer. Yeah, and for me and Sash, this was a few years ago when we decided to take the plunge and create MacGuffin and Company. And we were like, you know what, let's properly write some of this stuff up and put it out. And luckily, because we had, because the stuff is good, and also we had a pretty a small but solid following from our other projects. We had a real sort of boost and head start on that. And
something that I think is always interesting to hear from from game designers, and something I think we kind of already have touched on just a little bit, is where you start. Where you start game designing, and start being kind of arbitrary in that, again, of like, I don't feel like using that homebrew rule, so you're game designing. But when you sit down and you're like, I think I have an idea for a game, what comes first for you guys? Is it, I want to sit down and make a game, and that is the decision? Is it, I have an idea for a specific vibe that I want to capture, or an experience I want to capture, or there's a really interesting mechanic that I saw from this one that inspired me to do this, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of where does that start, or at least where has that started for you guys in previous projects? And we'll just turn it right back to you, Jonny. Why not?
Yeah, for me, so I love systems. So there are sort of two geneses, I guess, of game stuff. First is if we have the plan that, okay, we need to we're putting something out on Patreon, or okay, we want to do another of our micro settings, then it's a bit more structured. It's much more like, we'll sit down, I'll have a think about stuff, and it's much more like any other sort of writing or creative project. The one that's different is if something tickles my mechanical brain. If I'm playing or reading through an RPG and something catches it, or if there's just like an idea, I'm like, oh, hang on, what if dice did this? And then I'll just spend several weeks just with these, like every time I'm not doing anything else, just my brain will be like, and then the probabilities do this. And like half the time that will end up with me actually like putting down a system that maybe goes somewhere. The other half of the time I will simply like disgorge this system at Sash, and Sash will say, yeah, that's a pretty good system. And then having disgorged it, I'm like, okay, well, I'm kind of done with it now, actually.
Well, we will go to Sasha as the both designer and no, there's no way to say disgorge in a nice gross way.
No, Sash disgorges stuff. No, hey, I've been the bin for many of your ideas.
Yeah,
also.
Right, absolutely. I just mean, I am the moderator. I must be neutral, and I can't just say anything about one panelist.
It's an Ouroboros of
to
ideas
at or
splurging.
around another is all I mean. So I'll just cut to it and say, hey, what about you, Sasha?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jonny and I often have quite a similar approach in some ways, and in other ways, kind of opposite ones. So where Jonny is talking about, he kind of gets an idea about what if dice did this. The kind of corollary to that I will often have is, here is an idea or a feeling in other kinds of fiction or in my life that I haven't seen expressed in tabletop games. How would that work? How would you actually express this? So for instance, one thing that I love about Tolkien is the way that he describes food. I think all good fantasy really makes the food matter. And so for a long time, Jonny and I have been discussing, like, how would you make a fantasy RPG that really makes the food matter? Like, what would that look like? What would the implications be for the rest of the game? Would it have to be a really granular system? And for me, I'm coming to it with this, I want to express this particular theme or express this particular feeling from one piece of fiction. And for Jonny, he's like, how many different kinds of dice would I need to be able to do this? Do I need an inventory system that needs a new layout format? Like, and I think that works very well. Otherwise, the thing that usually sparks my ideas, and particularly the thing that I reach for when I am, like Jonny says, needing to develop an idea for Patreon or because we have to put something out to eat, is I will often have a perspective in mind that I think is funny or interesting that I want the players to have. So one of the reasons that I really like designing things like micro settings is because we can be incredibly specific about who the players are in a world. So for instance, it will be, okay, I want the players to be ancient Roman wrestlers, but I want them to be, or sorry, ancient Roman gladiators, but I want them to be like high school wrestlers. And that there will be something about that particular lens. Or like, oh, I want the players to be, I want them to be like colonizing this alien world and figuring out if the life there has sentience, but I also want them to be figuring out if they have sentience. So they're going to be little cute robots, and I will then pick this one very specific lens I want the players to have, and then design the world around it.
Sam, what about you?
Sure, I'm a little bit closer to Sasha, but less than like a feeling that is being evoked or like a certain thought to consider. It's more of a just general concept. So coming up with just an idea of the base, the base concept of a game, the base kind of story of a game. So with anamnesis, that was you are somebody who has woken up and don't remember who you are, and then you have to figure out who you are both in the past and the present. With another game that I'm working on, it's like you have two players and it tells the story of someone who gets transformed into an animal, kind of inspired by mythology and fairy tales, and then the two players have to work together to undo that transformation. So it's more of like a concept of what is the type of story that I'm interested in putting into game form, and then I figure out what are the mechanics that I need in order to gamify that type of story, and in order to invoke the feelings that I want to invoke through that story. So it's a little bit, I start usually from the concept stage.
What about you two?
Absolutely. I think maybe similar to Sasha talking about micro settings, but I feel like, and to our conversation about how game mastering kind of inevitably leads into game design, I feel like my first impulse is always like, oh, I want to play in a particular world. And usually it'll be like, oh, I want to play in the Lord of the Rings world or the Warhammer universe, just some universe I'm very excited about. And then it'll be like, well, there's RPGs out there already for those settings. I just need to learn them and dive into one of those. But then every now and then I'll want to play in a setting that doesn't have an RPG. I'll be like, oh, I wish there was like a Frostpunk / The Matrix, like sci-fi. Why doesn't that exist?
A thought we've all had.
It totally should. And then all of a sudden I'll start game designing for a world that is, so it's very much led by this impulse to play in a particular setting, a particular tone. That being said, when I did the Green Knight RPG and I had this very limited time frame, I understood immediately. I'm like, oh wait, I need a core mechanic and I need it this week. And whatever it is I pick cannot change a month from now and be like, actually, this doesn't functionally work. The dice don't do what I was hoping they would do. Like, it's got to be D20 based because I don't trust myself with any other range of numbers, really. This cannot be like something that I'm going to be spending months and months play testing the functionality of the numbers and stuff. I needed like one concrete mechanic. Everything else can expand off of that, but it needs to be simple, that means, because I didn't trust myself with too much crazy mechanics from that perspective. So
that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Having to lay that down in like a week and not touch it anymore.
I need this to be locked in place as the cornerstone, and I need that cornerstone cannot move at that point. I know will work going forward.
So none of you all get the Mind Splinter, the thing where you're like, what if failure was impossible? How would a system work in that sense? How could you make it meaningful? And like, you just have to sort of extract the splinter somehow, either by actually creating a system or just talking about it until it's gone.
I think a lot of creative people do get the Mind Splinter. I certainly get the Mind Splinter. But I think that, Jonny, where you get the Mind Splinter in terms of what about this change to the probability? I certainly get the Mind Splinter about what if you put these two discordant ideas together? how would how would you express that? It's how would you use this very weird, very puzzly, very imprecise, but also very like practical medium to express something that is almost like often easier to express in prose or something. You know?
I feel like I love when you apply the mechanics and then you notice an emergent property of the mechanics that you didn't notice going in, and be like, oh, that would make the critical hits feel like this. And inevitably this resource will become like a slippery slope in this direction that seems not bad and then gets worse and worse. And like you kind of, and you figure out, does that reinforce the general theme or not? And kind of prove around those edges.
And this is something, and maybe it's too in the weeds or too kind of niche, but something that another thing that I think you guys have also talked about a lot already, and is always very interesting, is I feel like a lot of people, or some people, have that kind of that splinter, whatever it is, whether it's narrative, whether it's a mechanic or whatever, and then there's the realization of, well, it's not really a game right now. it's a vibe, it's a concept, it's a one little mechanic or something, and then it's, oh, there's a lot more here that must be done, and it sometimes may be obvious, sometimes it may not be obvious. Has that been something that any of you guys have ever kind of grappled with, struggled with, and hopefully emerged on the other side of? And do you kind of have any words of wisdom, or at least kind of experiences to share around what goes into taking that kind of beating heart of the game and of your kind of like what is driving your passion to do all this work, and then making it something that's accessible to other people and something that can be played instead of just kind of read and nodded at and be like, yes, that is an interesting thing to consider. Feel free to hop in. Yeah,
I speak on that. I think that is, for me, the hardest part of game design. For me, the taking an idea, taking a thought, and kind of moving from that initial brainstorming stage into like, this is the text on paper, these are the mechanics I'm using. That is the hardest part for me. So I've kind of developed a couple of strategies. The first one just being, for some reason, at least for me, writing things on paper, doing the actual brainstorming in like a physical notebook rather than in a Word document helps a lot. And I don't know exactly why it is. I think it's just because I can, make lines between things. I can circle things. I can kind of do a trail of thought better on paper than I can on the computer. And that it's definitely one of those ideas of just throwing all of the spaghetti at the wall, seeing what sticks, writing down ideas even if you think they're bad ones, because you never know what other better ideas might stem from it. And really just using that time to get all of your thoughts out, and then you'll find what you're gravitating towards as far as what mechanics work, what you want the themes to be, things like that. Usually there's just like everybody who does creative work understands that aha moment, that once you find something that you're like, this is the one. It's just, for me, a matter of getting everything out until that moment arises.
Does anyone else have anything to add?
I'll just say, I feel like it's very interesting with RPGs, especially doing the game design for them. I felt like I discovered that there's no one moment when it transitions from being a vibe to being a game. You just pile on mechanics, and eventually what was a vibe and just a vague storytelling engine becomes something that feels like a game properly. But it's very much a feel as opposed to a concrete definition. And I found it very weird that my Green Knight game didn't feel like a game. That was it. It was like, oh, this is working, but is it a game? I don't think it is yet. And then I added classes, and I'm like, now it feels like a game all of a sudden. Why is that? And it really made me look at D&D very differently when it comes to like, you know, this thing can be a game, and it also can very much not be. It can just be an engine for storytelling, and that's maybe the strength of it. But like, it's hard to tell when it is properly speaking a game and when it is just something a bit more abstract than that. And it's a lot of like the just things that your mind latches onto and be like, I have a choice now between these two things. Suddenly, then it becomes a game, kind of. Yeah.
This is absolutely fascinating to me, because when you asked the question, I was like, oh, yeah, absolutely, completely relate. That I have had that experience so many times. But actually listening to Sam and Timm's experiences, I'm like, it feels completely different from me. I cannot relate.
What?
Honestly.
Your brain is a little different than other people's brains when doing creative work? That is, I think you should really consider that.
Yeah. Hot takes in the game designer panel. Yeah, that is really interesting, especially hearing Timm, you say like, oh, it's really nebulous about when something goes from an idea to when something goes to a game. I feel like I learn very, very quickly within a project if it is a game, if it is a one pager, you know, a gimmick game, or if it's just an idea actually. And I think it sounds harsh, but I've had to learn that not all ideas are bangers. And, you know, I feel like for me, it's that, yeah, that happens all the time. But I have had to learn to get a feel within myself of how much this idea really means to me, how much work am I willing to put in, and how much my brain is already latching other infrastructure onto it. If my brain's not already latching other infrastructure onto it naturally, then it's probably not a banger for me. It helps as well having a design partner a lot of the time who will add more infrastructure or say, I don't think this one's it.
I'm going to be a little bit controversial here and say, I don't think there's any such thing as a game. You know, the idea of a game is fake.
Hey,
in this case,
Tech Runner, could you change the name of the panel, the game designer panel, to whatever Johnny's about to say?
So the thing about RPGs is we are all just sitting around pretending that these systems exist. We are just like we've read a big book and we've all decided to sit around, and if this cube has a 6 on it, we all feel good. That's what happens, because our brains are like this isn't a computer where there's like a runtime error if the inputs aren't right. Like this is all like I've you know, you can have a great evening like with the right people. You can have a great evening out of like a single mechanic. Like the one-page RPG proves that there is no real sort of lower level for what is like a game. Like a prompt can be a game with the right group of people. Other people definitely need like a full thick volume in order to have that structure, and a lot of how much game you can get out, like a lot of your input to game ratio is dependent on how confident you are, who you're playing with, and your own experience in the medium. And also, like, you can get stuff where, like, technically it is just a single mechanic that you can drop into other games. Is it a game? No. Does it make an existing game better? Like, one of my games are fake. Absolutely happy to put my seal to that.
Babe, wake up! New Twitter bio just dropped.
One of my favorite games is a book called "Do Not Let Us Die in the Dark Night of This Cold Winter," which is it's an old it's from the early days of like the OSR, and it is specifically designed for you to drop it into any other fantasy system, and it is the group playing through a session which is a bitterly cold winter where you are trying to keep a very small village alive. And the mechanics are completely divorced from, like, there are some bits where it'll reference, do this however you would do it in your overall system. And other bits where it has specific like mini mechanics. And it's like, well, you know, most fantasy games can broadly be divided into like fighter, rogue, or wizard. So just pick one of those because each of them has a thing that they can do. But it's very rules light and very vibes heavy, and on its own is not a game, but you can drop it into a game to like it's almost an ingredient. But then again, I've met people who've played it, completely on its own with no like surrounding structure. So yeah, like I think the like I think there is with any project there's always that moment of like, is this anything? But I think also like tying that to sort of a rigid concept of like what is and isn't a game is sometimes holding ourselves back.
Kind of bounce off
I don't
of
know.
that.
Sorry. Cool.
So there's I played a campaign of Blades in the Dark with a couple friends of mine.
Now that's a game.
That is a game. But the interesting thing is that after playing it for a while, we got to the point where like we really loved the setting. We really loved the characters, and because my players really like to roleplay a lot, they really like to talk in character. We would have, by the end of the campaign, we weren't even following any of the rules of the game. We were just talking in character, maybe occasionally rolling a die. There were sessions where we'd have hours-long sessions and we would never roll anything. We would just talk. It's like, are we still playing Blades in the Dark? Are we still even playing a game? Who knows?
I do think that there is a difference between play and a game. And I think that what actually happens at the table could be either. And that is not for us as designers to dictate. Absolutely, if somebody starts using a game and then goes off into unstructured play, great. That is absolutely brilliant. But I think that Jonny is being somewhat facetious when he says that he does not think there is such a thing as a game.
What?
And I certainly feel like my earliest failure in game design was a very ambitious project that we worked on very early in our career, which I definitely feel was not a game and had to be put away because it was like clear that it simply wasn't a game. There were a lot of discordant ideas. I'm talking about Ensemble. So for me, we were looking to get we wanted to make a game that was basically like a bingeable TV show simulator. And I was very, very into the idea of structuring the game around acts and scenes, and this 4-act structure. And I spent so much time working out this one structure, but it wasn't a game because it was just the one thing. You couldn't do anything with it. I think to have a game, you have to have, even the really small ones, you have to have a perspective, you have to have a situation, and you have to have an action. At least for a role-playing game. I don't want board gamers to come for me because I'm not taking into account like chess or something.
The wars begin.
Yeah. And sometimes you just have to accept that you have an action, but you've got no perspective for it, or you have a situation, but no way to interact with it. And it's okay to just put those away, and maybe they'll come out later. I'd love to have my 4-act structure RPG turn into an actual RPG someday.
And I'm not being facetious. I'm being provocative. I'm making you think.
We're getting the clicks. That's what this is all about. Not perspectives. Clicks.
That's me.
Yeah. Oh, you were gonna say something, Tim. Go ahead.
You're all definitely making me think right now how much of the time when I was doing game design, I was thinking of like, I'm designing a skeleton here, and I feel like it's a huge cop-out because I'm just kind of like, well, that's where the organs and the meat go. That's not my job. And that's all the role-playing and like what makes the game really fun is what people add to it. And then when people told me their experiences with the game I designed, it was like they're introducing me to these people, these fully formed, like, oh, I met Bob, and I met Steve over here, and I met Karen. And I'm just like, I didn't meet any of these people. I designed a skeleton, and then you made these fully fleshed out people. And per Sam saying, sometimes you just disregard the rules. I had people do that with my game where they're just like, I met Boneless Joe, and I'm just like, well, I designed a skeleton, so I don't know what you did. Like, this is amazing. You took the game, but you took the part that I made and disregarded that, and still managed to play the game. Like, that's incredible. And it goes to show like what we do make as game designers, but also what we kind of have to pass over and be like, I can't teach you how to improv and role play with your friends, no matter how many rules I write down. And many good RPGs, I think, do try to codify that to some degree, but there's a lot that's just left up to the faith of what you're trying to do at the table, which I think is a strength of what these games are that we make.
I mean, and that's the case to a certain degree with any sort of creative endeavor. Like you write something, and like, you know, what you write and what people read are not actually the same thing. You know, like technically they contain the same words, but they are being like, those words are only half the mix. The other half is the brain that is producing or consuming those words. So like, and it's so much more with a game, because like with I feel like, you know, you're writing a book and someone reads that book, you've probably given a good 50% of what they're taking out of that book, at least. A game, like, maybe 10-20% of the magic of the actual game has anything to do with what you wrote.
Yeah.
I wonder how common it is for people to pick up an RPG and their first thought to be, oh, I want to do this, but not like they suggested. Like, I think that's such a natural impulse. Anytime we pick up RPGs, it's kind of like, I want to do this the way they're saying it. Oh, no, not that way, though. Like, no, you get to page 2 and you're just like, forget that. Yes to that, no to that. Like,
I think that's something that comes with experience to a certain degree. I've met a lot of like new role players who clearly feel quite constricted, like they've clearly got an urge to push a game in a certain way, but they're like, but the rules say actually we need to do it this way. And like, it sometimes takes a few games or a few years or a bit of experience for them to realize, actually that doesn't matter. No one's coming to my house to take away my rule books, or, you know, crush my dice.
Oh, you guys are much more lax on your rule enforcement. You know, hey, to each their own. Well, that kind of brings me to kind of a couple of related questions, because you guys, as game designers, are, like you kind of said, you are not in the room as people are playing and learning your game, and are not there to answer questions as they come up. Everything that you have to say as far as those people are concerned is in the book, right? Or is in the packet or on the one pager or whatever. And so kind of first, the first half of that I kind of want to talk about is a lot of your guys' games, and we've touched on it a bit, are very setting specific or very vibesy, or very, we want to evoke this kind of like, again, maybe it's the Green Knight specifically, maybe it's micro settings where it is like, we want to evoke a particular thing that is different than just everyday life. And we want to make sure you're in the mindset, so you're kind of role playing in a direction. But also, I presume you want to leave a little bit of space for people to kind of find their own stories, to meet and to create skeletonless Joe amongst kind of all of it. And so how do you guys go about in your settings, in your games, trying to communicate what, if any, kind of the vibes and the settings and kind of the genre is of this game, if that makes sense?
Do you mind if I hop in? Because this is a part of game design that I just absolutely love. It just makes me so excited. I love the feeling of, you know, the first time that you realize that you can do that you can just change something in a game. And then I want to give people that feeling so much. And I also love to communicate the vibes that I'm going for in my games. So I am a huge fan of being explicit about what your design principles are. I love to hand people the tools to mess with things, but in a way where they're going to know what they're doing. So I say, first of all, try to write the game and try to fit your writing specifically to the themes and the feelings, and set the tone with the text that you're creating. That's a huge one, because I feel like people will react to that with a like tone. But where the mechanics are interacting with it, and where there is space for customization, be explicit and say, we've designed it this way. If you changed it in this particular on this lever, it would have this effect on the game. You might want to do that, you might not. And then one of the other things that we do, which is a little bit of a cop-out, I guess, but I absolutely love in the micro settings, is that we write roughly four adventure campaigns, and then for the last one, we will say, here's 3 possible endings. Pick, like, the rest of the campaign has been written so that any of them will work, but whatever makes best sense for what your group have done, pick that one.
Cool. I love that.
I would say my the hack I am always thinking about is box outs. Little box outs where you can be like, hey, because like I love a box out because it's you tapping the reader on the shoulder. So like I'm very much of the opinion that's like, write your game a bit restrictively, because if it feels restrictive to you, like someone who has been like in this hobby and like role playing for ages, if it feels restrictive to you, then what that means is it will probably, like, to people who are less experienced, it will probably feel quite nice and structured and give them a lot of support and guidance. But then you have a box out that's like, also ignore all this if you want. So you have or as Sasha said, here are the design principles, here's how we've constructed this and why, which gives people who have more experience and more confidence to break stuff and go off in whatever direction they want, gives them the permission and the information they need to do that in the right context. So they're not necessarily being like, if there's a bit that is absolutely vital to the tone, like you can say in a box out, it's like, hey, like this bit is very important to how the game structures, but everything else, toss it out. So yeah, I think that's I think my feeling is like writing games that feel quite restrictive to you can actually be quite good for new players, as long as you make sure that it is fully clear and that there are lots of points, easy breaking points, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I also think that like a big part of getting kind of tone and ideas and style across, if you can work with an artist, that is like big, huge. Yeah. Not everybody is able to afford to work with an artist, but there's a lot of methods of crowdfunding too. And that is just like, if you can work with one, it makes a huge difference. I am somebody who like, my prose writing is okay, and I can like try to convey tone as best as I can through the prose, but having art in the book or public domain art that you find, also amazing, fantastic, great resources out there, can really help accentuate exactly what you're going for in the book itself. So that is, my suggestion would be to look for public domain art or to bring an artist onto your project sooner rather than later, like kind of in the middle of the project, once you kind of have your ideas down, know what you're going for, but you haven't finished writing it yet, because I think that art can inform design, can inform art, and when everything kind of meshes together very well, it can really be powerful.
A lot of museums and public libraries have huge online archives of scanned illustrations, and then just the tiniest bit of sort of Photoshop magic, and you have some amazing art for your books.
And Pixabay,
Pixabay is great.
Unsplash,
Love Unsplash.
what was the other? The Noun Project.
You're just reading my bookmarks tab.
That is what I was literally doing as well, is looking at my own bookmarks tab and list them off. All have available where you can the vast majority of the art there is free to use, including for commercial stuff, or there are other ones that you can buy or get memberships for or whatever. But a lot of good resources out there for cool art for your games and whatnot. Okay. Tim, sorry. Did you have anything else to add?
I'll just say my take on this is actually that this is one of the toughest things, and it's the most important thing for an RPG. And I think it's not just tough for me. It definitely is tough for me. But I look at D&D and I'm like, how does D&D really set the tone? And it's exactly what Sam said. It's the art, box outs, like Jonny was saying. Like, I think these are the tools, and prose, which is probably the best, but also like the hardest to like. Every like Warhammer RPG has like all these really good stories in it, and I'm just like, I want to read all of them because I know they set the tone so well. But I honestly think it's the most ham-fisted tool, and the most effective maybe is recommended reading lists. And the fact that we still rely on those and the art and all these other tools goes to show that like the game can be great, but it's really hard to get the tone across just through the game. It's very often like all the meta structure that you put around it. And I think it is one of the toughest things to do right. And when you're designing an RPG is like, how do you get the tone across? Yeah.
I always have a list of inspirations, whether it's other games, movies, podcasts, like books, anything. And as soon as somebody reads that list, they're like, I see what this is. It's such a great tool to both, show where you're getting these ideas from, and also to give people an immediate perspective of what it is you're going for.
I also want to say, Sasha, I just mentioned adventures. And actually, I think for getting across what your game is really about on multiple levels, adventures are often the best way. You can have a whole rule book and not get the tone, but if you read one adventure, you're going to get at least a certain percentage of the tone that is going for in a particular,
Makes sense. We only, somehow, this hour has truly flown by. So we want to make sure to get to a couple of audience questions. And one that I wanted to kind of get to that I think hints to a larger conversation is someone asked, I'd like to know if any of the other, if any of the panelists have had any games that they wanted to develop that didn't happen. And you can, obviously that can be part of your answer, but I also kind of wanted to draw that out a little bit into just kind of, if you're comfortable sharing times that you feel like you have failed as a game designer, right? Or you have like, that mechanic just doesn't work, or I don't think it's actually interesting. And something that, especially as you're further down in a project and you realize, I don't know if that's going to do it, or I have to rework this whole thing. And just kind of about your experience with that, and also kind of your just kind of tips is kind of a whatever loose word, but kind of just, again, your experience navigating it, and other ways that other people who are struggling to get their game in their beautiful little package, can kind of take away from your experiences.
I'll start off here. Yeah, like, I mean, the big one that Sasha mentioned earlier was Ensemble, which got quite far before it ended up not really coming together. But you have loads of projects that at a certain point you hit and you're like, I don't think this one's like I don't think this one's working. I feel like I have a dozen or more, none of which got far enough to be named. They're just, that idea I had for X or Y. But the thing is, the vast majority of them have ended up in other things in some way. Like, maybe it was this mechanic that I was tinkering with for this system that ended up just, not going anywhere. Or maybe it was this idea for like a world. Oh, no, we retooled it as a micro setting. So like, I think that I almost don't want to say, because like even Ensemble, a lot of the stuff from there is like we have picked up and popped into other games, or like there are a lot of good mechanics in there that I'm still like, what can we do with that? So like I'm actually going to say no, because even the stuff that is still lurking like in my past as just a heap of junk, there's some good stuff in that junk. And I can't say for certain that any of these projects will never contribute to something I do.
I'd like to kind of jump off of Jonny. I agree. It's kind of cheesy, but the idea that even when you are producing things, even when you're producing games that aren't good games, whatever a good game is, you're gaining that experience, you're gaining that knowledge. You can look back at it and say, like, what could I have done better? You're just improving. It's just like any other creative field. The more that you're doing it, the more that you're improving on it. I don't know that I would ever say that I've had like a failure in game design. I've had some games that I would not consider good, but I don't consider them failures because that wasn't their purpose. Their purpose wasn't to be good. It was to get that experience, to put something out there, to finish a product. I do think that, like, from a design perspective, the times where I have worked on a game and that what I am working on needs to be revised when I like play test it and it's not working is when I'm not trusting the players enough. So like I play tested a game with a couple friends where I had some questions in the games, like, hey, how is this making your character feel? How, and I'm like, that we don't actually need that at all. Like you're gonna have players who talk about their characters, who really get into character, who portray things not just through speech or just by saying how a character feels, but really showing that you don't need questions here.
Mhm.
That's just like, how is your character feeling? And that's kind of where that was one part of my design work that I'm working on and that I realized that I needed to adjust, is just like trusting your players.
I would agree with what people are saying. I think ideas are really fun to explore. I've never regretted exploring an idea. And I don't know that I would ever say I've had failures, but I've definitely had projects that I've been very excited about, pursued a certain degree, and then been like, I don't think it's an RPG. I think it's a card game. And it's like, no, it's a card game. And that's like, you take a step back and it's like, oh, it's not like I made a mistake in Sudoku. It's like, I have to go back to the beginning of the puzzle, wipe everything away and like start from scratch. But at the same time, there is something about that doesn't feel like a defeat. It feels like not a failure, but rather progress in a totally different direction. And the experience that you get along the way is invaluable as far as I'm concerned.
Perfect. A quick question also from the audience. And I think this is something that a lot of fledgling game designers, capital G, capital D game designers kind of run into, where the question is, so a person really loves the idea of TTRPG design, but is very inexperienced and intimidated by the crunchy probability kind of mechanic side of things. So was there any resources that were kind of particularly instructive for you guys that might be useful for someone who's like, hey, I want to do this, but numbers are scary, and if I get it wrong, people on the internet might yell at me, which is something I think everyone wants to avoid to a certain extent. So yeah, any books, any articles, any resources, or just SRDs that you found particularly useful for kind of learning the probabilities, the mechanics, or just kind of what that feels like?
I would recommend reading some solo games, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they are, it breaks it down into really just focusing on one person and one character. Maybe you have multiple characters, but a lot of solo games are also rules light. And it can show you that if you want to design games, but you don't want to design like a really crunchy game, there's a lot of games out there that are not crunchy whatsoever. I don't write crunchy games. My games are not like that at all. But if you do want to design a game with crunch, then looking at some of the crunchier sort of solo games, like maybe Ironsworn, that might be a good place to start, because you can just focus on, rather than looking at a whole party's worth of balance, you can see like, okay, with like this one person, how does balance work here? What are the mechanics that are going on here when you boil it down to just a character?
I would agree. The indie game scene in general is a really good source of resources. I think trying out games like Fate and Powered by the Apocalypse games, I don't know that they're necessarily my favorite, but I don't think I know any systems that taught me more about what makes up the structure of an RPG and how it can be not D20 based, but based on any resolution system you want. Exploring those was very inspiring for trying out different crunchier things that I have less experience with.
I'd agree that definitely check out lots of different games. I think that the more that you play and the more that you GM and the more game books you read, even if you don't actually get them to the table, the more systems that you can become acquainted with, the more that you will get a feel for which systems work and why crunch is used, what it's for, and how it feels to use. And then aside from that, try playing around with some dice probability calculators. Just Google probability calculator. There's a bunch. Find one that feels good to you. Just play around with it a bit. Take a game that you like, try out some builds, and then try seeing what happens to the probability when you have a character that is rolling 2d20s at an advantage, or 2d20s plus 5 instead of with the advantage. See what the difference is. see why one might be used rather than the other. And then I would say if you are wanting to kind of start actually designing, reskinning can be a really good way to get used to that, get used to thinking about those kinds of decisions. So thinking about, why does this mechanic go with this particular theme? What other themes could it work for? And I if it were me, I would then be very quickly going on to, and what would happen if I changed it? And what would happen if I moved it this way? You can start small, but yeah, try out a lot of different games, read a lot of different games, try them as players and as GMs. Try the kind of games that are the kind that you want to design, and some that aren't as well. Check out some dice probability calculators. They are an invaluable tool, and any article that kind of explains probability will always be more theoretical. And if you're someone who's doesn't instinctively get it, probably playing with it might be more fun for you. And then, oh, sorry, am I going on? We need to wrap up. Yes, but those are my suggestions.
So for me, like just bouncing off on what Sasha said, I think there's absolutely, and when you are playing and reading all those different systems, when stuff happens, when mechanical stuff happens in the, it's not so much about just playing them. Pay attention when mechanical stuff happens in the game. Just pay attention to how it makes you feel, and then try to think about why. Like, you're playing a game with exploding dice, and you roll. And the dice explode, and they completely one-shot a really powerful enemy because those dice just exponentially went off the deep end. And how does that make you feel? It makes, like, it's a thrill, it's a rush. It completely destroys a combat encounter, and then you can think, okay, so that's very pulpy, that's very like swingy. And then when you're designing a system, you can be like, is that what I want, or do I want something more like low-key and predictable? You play something like old school Call of Cthulhu, you're using a percentile dice and you're failing almost every roll because your probability chances are really low, and you're like, how does that make me feel? It makes me feel bad, but is it making me feel bad in a way that I maybe want for some of my systems? And how does it feel when I actually get it? And when there is like a surge of success. So it's as much as it's about playing and running and reading, it's about paying attention to how different mechanics make you feel and trying to figure out why.
Yeah, mindful consumption, it sounds like,
consumption
is the takeaway. Well,
vivisect.
Yes, exactly.
Cut them apart while you're playing them alive.
I mean, whatever your particular brand of investigation is, but that is up to all the lovely folks who are watching, either right here live or on the VOD or whatever. But terrible news, it's been an hour. It has absolutely flown by. Thank you all panelists for joining and sharing your lovely wisdom and experiences. But before we go, obviously want to make sure that everyone who is enjoying all of your deep insights and hilarious japes get to find out where they can support you, where they can learn more about you, all that good stuff. So if you would do a quick outro and where they can, again, give you your websites or whatever.
MacGuffinandCompany.com, Jonny Waistcoat and MacGuffin & Co. Oh, and we stream on Twitch as Jonny Waistcoat, MacGuffin & Co. and Sasha Sienna. Sorry, I stole your Twitch one, Sasha.
Hi, Sasha Sienna. You can find me on Twitter at Sienna Sasha and at Sasha Sienna most other places, or at MacGuffin & Co. My website is sashasienna.com and MacGuffin & Co.'s is MacGuffinandCompany.com.
And I'm at Timm with 2M's Woods.com. The Green Knight game is still available for sale, I think, on A24.
Got the merch up and ready.
My books are available on Amazon of random tables. And if you just search Timm with 2M's Woods, you'll find me on social media and everywhere else.
Oh, Sash, do you want to do plugs again?
Yes.
Or can you do Sam's really quick? Or?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I'm Sam. You can find my games at blinkingbirchgames.itch.io, and I'm at pretty much all socials at Goblin Mixtape. Thanks.
And I am Nathan. I have been your moderator today. You can find out all about me at reckless_attack or at Lurz Blurbs, or just learn more about our weekly podcast, actual play podcast and interview show, Reckless Attack at recklessattack.com. That is it from us. The next panel we have is at 3 Eastern time. We will be talking sound design for audio and podcasts and streams and such. So please stay tuned. But also, most importantly, please go check out all of the awesome work done by all of the excellent panelists here today. And hopefully see you all again very soon. Bye.
Bye.